Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And it's a special episode today. We're together.
In the same room.
In the same room. This is gonna be so fun. We're typically in our own little studios, but you got the home studio advantage today, so I'm joining you up here. It's gonna be great. Spend some time together, and we're gonna talk today about something that's really important. I think you're gonna agree with this. It's communication, and a specific little aspect of communication. I can't stand it when leaders can't communicate correctly. I know we're all working to get better at communication all the time, but have you ever had a leader that didn't know how to communicate? If so, you know it makes it really hard for the organization to stay aligned and everything. So today, Mark, I'm excited for us to spend some time together. We're gonna give basically some tips on how to become a better communicator as a leader. It's gonna be a fun episode.
Yeah, and specifically to your point, public speaking.
Exactly.
I mean, we may come back at a future date and talk about writing or one-on-one communication or team communication. Those things are all important. But today, like a laser, we're going to focus on being a better public speaker.
And as I said, I know you and I are always working on this, but I think we might be qualified to talk about this. I'm guessing we've done maybe 10,000 talks between us. We'll talk about that later. But
I wish we'd have kept an exact number, but it's at least 10,000.
But we've been trying to get better, and
for a long time.
People may think we're not very good now. You should have heard us back then.
I was really bad.
We've been doing this for a while, so I'm excited about having this conversation today. And I want to start the conversation with something that we both believe is really important. It's this: the audience is the hero. I would say if you're going to start anywhere, start by understanding who you're talking to and make them the hero of the talk. I heard somebody say one time that a book, specifically, I know we're not talking about writing today, but a book is not about something, it's for someone. I think a talk is the same way. It's not about a piece of content or whatever. It's actually for someone. The content's important, but if you'll start with who it's for, that's a good spot.
And I would say it's a mindset that will permeate every facet of your preparation and your delivery. If you get your heart and mind on the audience from the very outset, you'll be more effective as a communicator.
All right, so I want to jump to number 2 here. So that we're starting with the audience, but number 2, let's begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. And when I think about this, I don't know who told me this or where I came up with this. I've kind of massaged it through the years, but there's really 3 things that I think about when I'm communicating with a group, an audience. And again, an audience can be, I did a talk one time for one person, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And you can have 10,000. I know you had talks with 10,000 and everything in between we've both done, which is great. But I always ask myself a couple of questions. The first thing is, what do I want people to know when we walk out of the room? I mean, what do I really want them to know? And that really is the content piece. Like, what is it about? And what do I want them to know and capture? Secondly, what do I want them to do? You and I are both practitioners. I'm a big believer in you practice your way to where you want to go. And so the application side of content is so important. What do I want them to know? What do I want them to do? And what do I want them to feel, Mark? I think it's so important for us to ask ourselves, what do we want the audience to feel? I want them to feel motivated. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel challenged. I want them to feel sometimes a kick in the pants. I want them to feel capable. I want them to feel like I can do this. I think sometimes we make it too hard. And so what I want them to know, what I want them to do, what I want them to feel, those are some important questions. Begin with the end in mind.
Absolutely. And I'll share an abbreviated form of that I've used for a long time is after this presentation, the audience will blank. What? I mean, and again, you could then put know, do, and feel in that blank. But I literally have tried to cultivate the discipline over all these decades of starting with that at the top of the page or at the top of my computer. Because we may have more than we can or should say on a given topic, but if I keep running it back through that filter, it helps me decide what I should keep and what I should say for another day. What is it you want them to do after the presentation? Fill in the blank, and I think that'll help you.
That's great. Now, people may be listening today and they're thinking, you guys haven't even talked about the talk yet. I'm not ready to talk about the talk. What do we want the audience to know, feel, do? What do we want it to be afterwards? Let's make them the hero of the thing. But let's talk before we start working on the talk. Or talking about the talk. Let's talk about preparation. That's another important facet of becoming a great public speaker, is making sure that we are preparing, and not just preparing. Say more about that.
Well, I think there are two parts to preparing, and one is the creation of the content, and I call that preparation. There are people who believe the preparation involve primarily the practice and the repetition of actually going back through the material, and I don't want to minimize that, but I'm going to put more time on getting the content right. Now, maybe we can do that because we've been communicating for decades. I really don't feel like you need to have poorly conceived content delivered flawlessly. I'd much rather have life-changing content, even if it might not be the most eloquent representation of that content. So I'm about preparing for both, but here's kind of my bottom line. You need to prepare far more than you probably think you need to prepare.
That's kind of where I was leading you there. I think you talk about this all the time, the importance of preparation, and it takes on many forms. I think about sometimes you and I talk about the same kinds of things often, but I always want to make that fresh. And so if I'm working with a company, I want to make sure I understand that company, and I'm putting the content in the language of that.
In the context.
The audience is the hero. I want to make sure that I'm understanding what they're doing, putting it in that context. That's a good way to say it. And so I want to prepare more than I think I need to. I can't just, in fact, I don't want to be the old, can you imagine being a musician? You've got a one-hit wonder and you have to sing that every night your whole life. I think the freshness that a good communicator puts on a talk, it becomes evergreen at that point, and can be transformational.
Well, you need to prepare as if it's the first time they're going to hear it. Oh, because it is the first time they're going to hear it.
Yeah,
I just find a lot of communicators, a lot of leaders specifically, under-prepare, and then they're disappointed with the results. And again, it starts with preparation.
Yeah. Okay, so here's one. You and I probably need to hear this one again, but let's don't try to do too much. I know for me, if I'm not careful, and early on as a communicator, I would at times, I got all this stuff I want to say. It's so important that we don't try to do too much, Mark. It's that we keep it simple.
Right, which is why when you go back to start with the end in mind, I encourage leaders, if you can make that one thing to know, one thing to do, one thing to feel, or just one thing at the end of this presentation, the audience will blank. You're much better off than here are the 7 things that people need to know and do and feel and believe. It's like they're not going to get it. And I think we're kidding ourselves. Many leaders would say things like, well, I need to cover the material. That's never the goal. It's never the goal to cover the material. It is to present the material in a way that people can internalize it and act on it. And the more content we share, the less likely they are to act upon it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so here's another one. If the audience is the hero, I want to make sure I connect with the audience. And I think to your last point, there are times if we're not careful, we've got all these things we need to say and let's just get through the presentation. That's not the goal. The goal is to not say stuff so people hear it. It's to say stuff so people connect with it.
It's about transformation.
It is about transformation.
We're trying to change hearts, minds, and behavior.
That's exactly right. And so when we say connect, you want to connect with that audience. But one of the things, and I want you to talk about the power of this, is we want to connect early. And so that connect during the talk, but you and I both would say, I learned this actually from you, is we want to connect before the talk. Will you talk about that? You taught me years ago about the power of that.
Well, real simply, this is something John Maxwell taught me. And he asked the question, what do all great communicators have in common? Well, if you think about that, that's a pretty hard question because they're all shapes and all sizes and all ages and male and female and different personalities and different temperament. But great communicators do have one thing in common. They all connect. So if you believe that, John said, why would you want to wait to connect and to begin that process after you take the stage? And he introduced me to what he calls a slow walk through the crowd. And he always wants to meet some of the people before he goes on stage. Well, I decided if a little bit's good, a lot is better. And so my discipline for decades now has been to try to be in a room at least half hour early and I can meet about 200 people in that 30 minutes. And I can, I'm
Shake
Mark,
hands.
who are you, where are you from, I've been there, recommend a restaurant, I'm going there next week, and have those really, really short conversations with up to 200 people. Now, I've done this in a room with thousands of people, I can still do 200. The size of the room doesn't matter.
In 30 minutes.
In 30 minutes. But if you've got 40 people, 50 people in the room, you can connect with all of them. And then when I'm really on my A game, I'll be able to reference something during the talk that Joe told me this, or Sue's from Seattle, talk to her if you're headed that way, whatever. And that just takes connection to another whole level.
Well, and I was going to say two other things about that. To me, when I do what you're talking about, and then I get on the stage, it is like you feel like you know some of them, and they certainly feel like they know you more than they would have, or you just,
they're more receptive.
Because they probably know a little bit about you anyway, because you're the keynote speaker.
But they're more receptive to what you have to say.
And to that point, that's the second thing I was going to say. You told me years ago, actually, that if you have evaluations that take place, it is crazy. Your scores go up if you do what you're talking about over. And I've tried this before, and it's like literally my score. If you start comparing this talk to that talk, I spent
about a half
with
a
the
point.
crowd. It's crazy. It's about a half
on a 5-point scale.
That crazy. And so
about a half point.
it's big to connect, but to connect early. And really, if you start with number one, the audience is a hero. That's what you're there for. You're there for them. You're not there for you to get out of town. Next thing, I think we're there to serve people, and transformation takes place when we do. Okay, this next one's going to sound crazy, but we're going to say, don't tell stories. Don't tell stories. We're both storytellers. We believe in the power of story. But I would say don't tell stories, Mark. I'm kind of leading them down the road. Talk about the power of this.
Yeah, it was the most contrarian advice I ever received from one of my public speaking coaches. I have hired several men and women throughout my career to help me try and take my game to the next level. And Victoria LeBaum, she's still out there. She still coaches. She is the coach of professional speakers. She's the Butch Harmon in the speaking world. Butch was Tiger's coach, for those that don't know that.
In the golf world, yeah.
In the golf world. So Victoria challenged me. She said, I don't ever want you to tell another story. And I thought, that is the most bizarre counsel I've ever heard. And I know she was letting it sit there in my spirit while I was even processing it. She said, instead of telling stories, take them there. Take them there. And she said, you typically tell your stories too quickly. You typically don't include enough detail for the stories to be credible. It's as if you're in a hurry to get to your next content point.
Tell them about the box. Tell them about the box.
Okay, I got before I get to that. So in one of our sessions, I was telling a story, my definition, telling a story, and she said, stop. And I thought, are you having a heart attack? What's going on? And she said, the man. I said, what man? She said, the man you just referenced. I said, what about him? She said, I know nothing about him. She said, is he old? Is he young? Is he white? Is he black? What's he wearing? Does he have on Ben Franklin glasses or not? And she said, you have to take me there. So even after she coached me on it, she still had to call me out. She said, don't just say a man came to the door. Take people there. Yeah, and part of her deal was it's beyond storytelling. In one of my sessions, I held up a box, imaginary box, and then I went to put it down, and my hands went from here to here, and she stopped me, and she said, the box. I said, what about the box? And she said, what happened to the box? I said, what do you mean, what happened to the box? She said, well, was it this big or this big? Because when you started, it was this big, and now it's this big.
And you dropped the box?
She said, I'm confused. And I said, well, it's an imaginary box. And she said, right, you're trying to help people see the box. So it has to be the same size when you turn. And then when you turn, you have to put it down. And then you've got to walk around it for the rest of your presentation because there's a box there.
So good.
She's crazy.
Yeah.
And she's been so helpful.
And it has helped
to me
over the
better.
years. That's good. Okay, so which kind of leads us to our next one is that we want to speak in color, not just black and white. And that's obviously the imaginary box. You should know what the color of it is, I guess. But this is more about your pace and your tone, and even things like when you talk. And this is one of the things I try to do. I heard somebody years ago that was coaching me on this, talking about if you're talking to an audience and you start referring to something that's moving from one direction to the next, go from left to right. Well, right now I'm going from right to left because the people on the screen, they're seeing it the other way. And we, in America, we read left to right. And so those kinds of things. And if you start over here one time with a point, and then you make it and move to this other side, make sure when you refer back to whatever the thing is, you start back where you started and you go there. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to put color in your talks to help them be better. The box would be an example, and characters. And you know, if she says, does he have Ben Franklin glasses? And you're like, I don't know. You got to know your characters. You got to know your story. That's part of your preparation.
Yeah. And let me just elaborate just for a moment. A lot of communicators, they use the same pitch, the same tone, the same pace. That's what I'm referring to with black and white. It's vary your pace, vary your tone, right? I mean,
there's times you can use quiet.
So
there's times you can get loud. Yeah.
That's the color we're talking about, in addition to the imaginary / tangible objects, and right to left, left to right, and on and on and on.
Yeah. A lot of things we can do.
Bring some color. If it sounds blah 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 blah,
Charlie Brown's teacher, we're not listening. We're checking.
That's not what it needs to sound.
We don't want to hear that. And if you've led a meeting and you're just not giving any thought to any of this stuff, don't be surprised if people are like not looking forward to your meetings. So we want to do that. Okay, another thing we can do, I think this is powerful. You and I just did a webinar, and I'm looking forward to getting the tape of that so I can go back and watch it. We would both say review the game footage if you can. Go back, just like a coach would. I'm an old coach. We used to take time. We'd watch the film, make some adjustments. I think communicators can learn a lot from watching themselves. If you can't watch yourself, you may say, well, I don't have a video. You can take your own phone and just turn on the record button, and at the end, push it off and listen to it. And that's probably 1A. It's not as good as being able to actually see the footage. I think if you will evaluate that, you can get better each time and make these small tweaks. So I would say review the game footage, very important.
Yeah, I spoke last week at the Joint Forces War College, and I was excited to do it. I guess I'm on the adjunct faculty. This is my third year.
And tell them about the War College. I mean, it's like crazy.
Yeah, senior military leaders from all 5 branches. I guess they're 5 branches now because they added the Space Force. Maybe it's 6 branches. All of the senior leaders and leaders from historically over 40 countries. Senior leaders.
They're military leaders.
Yeah. They come for this. And I was excited to do it, thankful to do it, tried to add value. You know what I'm really excited about? They're going to send me the video. They're going to send me the video. And even though I've done that particular talk more than 100 times, probably, I'm going to watch that and I'm going to try to get better.
And you'll learn something.
Yeah. One night, my wife came in and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm watching this. She said, that looks like you. And I said, well, it is me. And she said, but hadn't you done that talk before? This was a talk I knew I had done 11 times because it was for the same organization. And I was going to do it again. I said, yeah, but I got to do it again next week. And I think I can do it better.
Yeah.
I mean, football coaches don't watch the film of one game and go, okay, we don't have to watch the film for any more games because we're going to learn these things and we're going to play the game and it's over. No, you got another game. You got another opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I would say as often as possible, if you want to take your game to the next level, you need to watch the game footage.
I think there are people that are listening who say, I don't like to hear myself on tape. Well, we don't get to say that. We have to, you've got to.
Others have to hear you.
You got to, somebody's here. And so how can we focus on trying to get better? And I think this is so important. And I've done this for you. We've sent each other stuff. I mean, you can find somebody and say, check this out. Or somebody maybe that's in the audience, even ask them for feedback. What could we have done to make that talk better, more engaging? I ask that almost everywhere I go and do a talk. I always ask the host at least for feedback and try to get some on that. So I think there's power in reviewing what happened.
And we just, as you referenced, finished shooting the webinar an hour ago. We had lunch. We debriefed
during lunch
how we could communicate better the next time we have an opportunity to do a webinar.
That's exactly right.
And we hadn't even watched the footage yet.
And you say debriefed, it wasn't just us. It was our team. We talked to the people. Exactly. Who make all the magic happen. So thanks guys for that. That's awesome. Okay, so here we got a couple more. I would say practice, Mark. There's nothing better for a speaker than to speak. And they say writers write and they get better when they write. They also get better when they read. But I think speakers get better when they speak. And I do think it's great to listen to great talks. That's another way we can practice. But there's just nothing better than you getting in front of a group of people and trying to move them toward transformation. I think that's so powerful. And again, I'm guessing you and I have done 10,000, I mean, conservatively, we've probably done 10,000 talks together over, we've been doing this a long time, 40 years almost together. And so I want to encourage you to practice. I mean, I just think I was listening to a thing this morning, actually on the way up here, on Winston Churchill, and it said he had all these little pithy sayings and things that he was always ready with a, one line kind of thing, and always right for the moment. But the guy was making the point that he practiced those over and over again, and so they'll be ready in those moments. And so I think good communicators are always thinking about, how do I get better? How do I help people move the needle with whatever they're trying to do? And so I think practice is a huge opportunity. And sometimes we don't understand that when we're speaking to a group, it is a chance for us to be learning ourselves and
Sure.
and getting better.
Well, yes, and yes, but let me add a word to that. Repetition alone does not constitute valuable practice. Some of you've heard of the concept of deliberate practice, because you can make the same mistakes over and over and over and confuse and just be convinced that you're getting better because, well, I've done it 10 times, 12 times.
Yeah.
Not unless you've consciously and purposely attempted to get better and you've done specific things to get better. So when we say practice, it's not just blind repetitions. That's the first thing I'd say. And I don't know how this idea of practice strikes you. I had somebody come to me years ago. They wanted to be a better communicator. And I said, fantastic, I'll help if I can. And I said, so how often do you speak in front of a group? And they said, well, never. And I said, what does that really mean? And they said, don't do it. In fact, I had one guy say he'd never done it, but he wanted to be a public speaker. And so we talked about some things that, in both two different examples that come to mind of how these folks could get better. But for both of them, I said, you need to actually do the thing. And I think that would be true if you said you wanted to be a better cook or you wanted to be a better golfer. You got to swing the club. You got to turn on the stove. I mean, you actually have to engage. Yes, the deliberate practice is helpful, but you can't even do that if you're not in the game, right? And so I would say, I gave somebody this advice last week. Go to your Rotary Club, go to your Kiwanis Club. They're always looking for speakers. Go to your church and tell them you'll be a substitute Sunday school teacher. I mean, look.
Join Toastmasters.
Whatever. Or at your company, say, hey, if you ever need an employee to speak at orientation, I want to volunteer. Make up opportunities to practice.
Practice on your kids, whatever.
You just practice. Yeah, it's hugely important, and I think it's undervalued.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so one of the things that has really inspired me about our friendship is just to watch you continue to go after it. I mean, I've heard you talk a lot. It's been great, and so many inspiring.
And I'm still getting better.
And you're still getting better.
I'm trying.
But I think the point, and this is what I would leave them with as far as the list goes, it's the idea of pursuing mastery. You never got to this point in your career, and I'm the same way. I've never gotten to this point where I think, hell, you're a pretty good communicator. I'm not sure I want to keep getting better. And I think that mindset has driven you to continuous improvement. Same thing for me. Can you talk about the idea of mastery, the importance of pursuing mastery? Not just with this would be true for any area probably, but specifically in communication. I think so many people are leading meetings or leading a company and they're expected to communicate. They need to be getting better, and they just sort of put that off to the side and say, well, that's just not my strength. I think it's important for us to continue to try to improve here, even if it's a weakness to start with.
I think there's something comforting in mediocrity. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but there's something comfortable about being comfortable. And if you commit to learn and grow, much less committing to pursue mastery, you're going to be uncomfortable. I actually took Victoria with me to an all-day workshop, and at each break, she was telling me stuff to do differently the next session.
And that's kind of uncomfortable, right? I mean,
talk about a live fire exercise. I'm not sure if it was a...
And you're paying her.
I'm paying her, but the people there are expecting me to do this and do it well. And it wasn't the most comfortable, but it was a live fire exercise, and I was learning and growing. And so I think we've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And mastery is one approach. Now, we've talked about mastery. We've written about mastery. It's actually one of those key ingredients in organizations that excel at execution. Their people have made a commitment to pursue mastery. And when we say mastery, we're talking about a situation or circumstance where the behavior is consistent, the delivery or execution is flawless, and the activity becomes second nature.
Yeah.
So you become really, really good at it without conscious effort. You become unconsciously competent. Doesn't mean you can't learn and grow more, but you don't have
It's like breathing. I mean,
it's like it just becomes part of who you are.
part of who you are.
And so
Yeah. So
that's the journey I think we're on.
That it is. I mean, it really is. And so hopefully those tips will help you become a better communicator. Now, before we go here, a couple of things. First, talk about maybe some talks you've heard through the years. I don't know if you've got an example of one, but just the power of a well-delivered message. Like, how important is that? I mean, it's like, think of all the times you've been inspired by somebody, you've been moved. I've been changed. I mean, I literally listen to something and go, I'm not, I came in here one way, I'm going to leave, I'm going to do something different. There's so much power in this. You think of a talk or two that's, I'm putting you on the spot here, I know.
That's fine. I can think of one that I heard, but it changed my son's life more than it changed mine. And it changed the trajectory of tens of thousands of folks in Africa. And you've heard this
Yeah,
story.
well, yeah. I have.
Justin and I were at the Leadership Summit 18 years ago.
I was there as well.
18 years ago.
I was there, yeah.
And Bono talked about,
You too, Bono. I mean,
you too,
we're talking
Bono,
rocker. Yeah.
talked about the AIDS epidemic in Africa. And he gave a compelling, life-changing talk. And my son, who was 18 at the time, seated by his best friend, left that room and said, we ought to be able to do something. And within a year, he and 3 of his other friends were in Africa to make a documentary on the AIDS crisis. They believed that if they could increase awareness in the States, perhaps we could marshal more energy and more resources to address the problem. What he didn't realize is that that trip would end up being a defining moment for him, and he founded an organization 17, 18 years ago, now called Untold, and they've had 50,000 graduates from their 9-month program. They operate 120 centers in 4 countries in East Africa. And Justin is my hero.
Yeah, he's amazing.
And that came as a result of a communicator who actually changed more lives than we would even be able to count.
Well, 2 things about that. I didn't know you were going to tell that story, but
I didn't know you were going to ask that
well,
question.
I knew you didn't. 2 things about that. One is you didn't mention this. I think that now they're over 100,000 kids that would have been orphans.
Right.
Had Justin and that team and that crew gotten involved. So
Y'all be close to 150,000.
It may be now. I mean, it's wild how many kids are growing up with moms and dads because of the work they're doing, which is amazing.
Because it's a triage model. They take men and women who are at the point of death.
Yeah.
And as you may know, with proper treatment, medication, nutrition, and so forth and so on, you can give these folks 25 to 30 more years of life. So all those people who are at the point of death can now raise their own children. So that's a legit number.
Yeah, it really is.
50,000 kids.
It's pretty amazing. And so, yeah, shout out to Justin and the Untold team.
And to Bono for being a great communicator.
I'm gonna talk about Bono here. If there's anything you want to get involved in to help, go help Untold. I mean, it's great. We just kicked off a $30 million campaign. I mean, it's amazing what's going on here. So that's great. But let me go back to Bono. So I remember that talk, and he talked about putting color to a talk. One of the things he said was he was being interviewed by this guy, and he said, the guy's like, why this? Well, like, you're Bono. And I mean, he was kind of at the height of his powers, and U2 was, crazy and all this stuff. And Bono said this, he said, I'm just a guy. He said, I got really cool sunglasses. And you remember him saying, and I got a cool leather jacket. And so, and he said, I sing okay, but he said, I'm not that great of a singer, but I got cool sunglasses and a cool jacket, and people think I'm cool. And he said, so they decided to give me all this influence. And so and money and fame and all that stuff to go with it. And I made a choice. I decided I'm actually going to spend it. Just such a powerful, simple sentence in a talk. He said, I've gotten all this stuff that people have given me. I'm going to spend it. And so I'm trying to do something with what I've been given to make a difference in the world. And little did he know Justin would be in the room. We need to put him and Justin together someday. But it's incredible what happened just through a guy doing just a compelling talk. And
Sure.
It was great. So
And
that is a great
Let me
example.
connect a dot here. You guys and gals listening to this, you've been given influence. You're in a position of leadership. And one of the ways that you spend that is to commit to become a better communicator. And who knows what lives you might change just by articulating your message in a more compelling fashion.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so we normally give them a book to read.
Oh yeah.
I want to mention a book. I think we've given them the Mono story and all that stuff. That's great. But let's talk for a second about a book, Resonate, by Nancy Duarte. I think Nancy wrote it. Maybe her team may have helped with that. I'm not really sure, but I know you've been involved with them. Can you tell them a little bit of Nancy's story? And this book, the reason I mention it is because one of the things that they talk about in that book is the audience is the hero, and just being able to create resonance with your audience. I think it's so powerful. I know Nancy's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about
It's a great
her?
book. Nancy and her husband Mark started Duarte Designs. I bet it's been 30 years now, and many would think and say that they are the best visual communications company in the world. They're in Cupertino, is how you pronounce it?
Cupertino,
Cupertino,
out in California.
Out in California.
Right next door to Apple.
Well, they produce, that was the reason I mentioned that, they produce a lot of the communications, the visual communications for Apple. And one of their claims to fame is they created the slideshow that Al Gore used to win the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
That was a Duarte product. And the last I checked, they've done over 250,000 presentations.
It's amazing.
During their career. And so, yeah, she's written several
But the book, Resonate,
The book Resonate
so
is
good.
outstanding. And I would
I will
suggest,
put a link in the notes for
Yeah.
that. But yeah, that's good.
be a great
Okay, so I love your final charge there. Go make a good talk. Anybody that's listening, I encourage you to lock in on becoming a better communicator. You have what it takes. You're going to need to learn. You're going to need to grow. You're going to need to practice all those things. Start with who's it for. If you'll start there and work on getting better, I think maybe 40 years from now, you'll be better than you were when you started. I believe that. But you won't, if you're like us, you'll say, I'm not where I want to be. I'm going to keep making progress here. We believe you can. Continue to download what we got going on here. Share with your friends and family. Thank you so much for being a part of our crew here. We really do love you guys. And until next time, remember, the best leaders lead every day.